And they're wagging that dog, and the reason that they're wagging that dog is because they feel if they can control the politicians, they don't really have to care what people think. Just look what happened with Prop Z in Oakland and what's going on with that. And while people are saying we want marijuana legal, they're closing up the clubs in Oakland. So what we really have to do is get to the point of realizing that we're not dealing with the issue of is marijuana good for you. We're dealing with the issue, these people, these are special interests, those are the only people opposed to it, and I don't have time to go into it, but how to separate the politicians from the cops. Because right now, there's a bungee cord between those two groups, and we have to cut that bungee cord and let the cops go into free fall. Because that's what the people want. They want civilly regulated marijuana. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Marsha Rosenbaum. Marsha is a sociologist who did her doctoral work on heroin addiction, and she's really been in the trenches of harm reduction on heroin addiction. But I want to tell a story on Marsha. I know she's a sociologist because we were at lunch one day and we were talking about Montel Williams as a spokesman for medical cannabis, and we were kind of guessing about what sort of reaction Montel would have in the world out there. And as a sociologist, she said, well, let's just start asking people. So she hopped up from her chair and she went from table to table, and she would ask them, when I say Montel, what is you here? And everybody knew Montel Williams. They were able to give that identification. And then she'd say, well, do you know that Montel has been in the news lately? And mostly what would happen is that the demographic of kind of 50-year-old white women knew that Montel had been in the news because he had been on the talk show circuit for his medical cannabis, or they knew that he'd been on the news. And then she would say, well, do you know why he's been on the news? And most of them didn't, but they would say, well, what's going on? And then Marsha would use the occasion to introduce the idea, and she said, well, he has multiple sclerosis and he smokes medical cannabis. And I will never forget the response from one of the women at one of the tables who, when Marsha said that, snorted and said, well, that'll make him forget he has MS. I was like, wow, that is the kind of hostility we're dealing with out there when we talk about this issue. And Marsha is very courageous to raise the question with people in a restaurant. She's also been very courageous, probably the person single most responsible for bringing the California Parent-Teacher Association on board for sensible approaches to drug education in our schools. In the terms of rhetoric, she is a mom who cares about her kids. It makes her a very valuable messenger in bringing the message of harm reduction. So without further ado, Marsha Rosenbaum.
Now remember, we were in Los Angeles for that lunch. We were not in San Francisco. The reaction would have been very different here, I think. So I want to share with you some of my experiences with rhetoric. You know, when Alan called me to ask me to be on this panel, I didn't even ask him what the panel was. I said, of course, you know, whatever you need. And then I looked at the title of the panel, Reefer Rhetoric and Retorts, Winning Ways to Frame the Marijuana Debate. And at that moment when I looked at it, I thought I had just gone on a trip with, an actual trip to Turkey actually, with my friend Donald Abrams. And he was talking about how his mother, not only does she talk about how the glass is half empty, but the glass is half empty and about to tip over. And that's how I felt lately, this last month or so with our issue. So I thought, winning ways, okay. So here's what I want to share with you. What it's like out there in conventional America to talk about the issue of marijuana. First, I have framed the issue as carefully as I can, particularly when it comes to teenagers and drug use and marijuana use, which is my focus. You know, basically, I don't think mainstream America really cares about what we say about marijuana until you start getting close to the kids. Now, when you get an audience with the kids, then they start getting nervous about what you're going to say. So I've been very, very careful, and of course, I look like the straightest person that ever walked. Roger Goodman thinks he does, but I think I do. And so what I've tried to do is to influence the marijuana debate without talking about marijuana. My purposes were, I wanted to educate parents, tell the truth, let them hear the truth. I wanted to advocate for, and still do, for honest, science-based drug education in schools, too. And my third purpose was to, and is, to undemonize marijuana. So here's what seems to have worked. Now, David introduced me and used the words harm reduction a couple of times. And in fact, a decade ago, I had a booklet published, this one. It's called Kids, Drugs, and Drug Education, a Harm Reduction Approach. Bad title. Really bad title. First off, harm reduction has now become a lightning rod, so you can't really use it anyway. But harm reduction is sort of negative terms. Harm is negative, reduction is negative. Kids, I don't say kids anymore if I can help it. Sometimes it comes out of my mouth because I think about my own children who I call my kids, and they're in their 20s, but kids doesn't work. What I found was, in terms of a title for what I was doing, instead of harm reduction, safety first. Safety positive. Nobody objects to safety. Everyone likes safety. And first is first. And it's the tagline, a reality-based approach. Reality. I think when we talk about reality, what's really going on, that's a positive word. And teens, I use teens instead of kids now. So I've also, much to the chagrin of Ethan Nadelman, our executive director, have tried to influence drug education without putting it in the context of broader drug policy reform or marijuana reform. And so when I do presentations and talks, it's safety first. It's a safety first project. And then down there in the little tagline, it's a project of the Drug Policy Alliance, which Ethan hates. But anyway, so that's what I've tried to do, is to put some distance. Also, another strategy that has heads nodding more than anything else, I think, is making sure that your definition of drugs is broad. When you start to talk about pharmaceutical drugs, when you start to talk about the commercials we see on television, on primetime TV, with this wonderful, very nice person asking you if you're worried all the time, and it's of course a commercial for Prozac or Paxil or one of those. This is a drug. It changes the way you think and feel and perceive things. And when people grasp, and they do quickly, that, hey, what we're talking about here, we're talking about marijuana and other illegal drugs, but really, there's no difference. A drug is a drug is a drug is a drug. And I think Americans now, more than ever, recognize that and are right there with you. You say, we're drug-free America? Are you kidding?